Hello and welcome to episode 3 of 5 Commander Cards You Didn't Know. The theme for today is converted mana cost of 4. It seems very odd, but I want to kind of add some different styles of flavor. I don't want to do one from each color, one set of artifacts, one set of enchantments, one set of planeswalkers. I'd rather make some weird rules that kind of make the restrictions that allow for some creativity. So in this episode, we're going to be looking at converted mana cost 4. So, let's get started with our first card. Alright, the first one we're looking at is Siphon Mind. It's a slightly older card, but I personally find this to be a great card in the multiplayer format. So it's 4 mana, 3 colorless and a black, and each other player discards a card from his or her hand. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. In one-on-one, not that good. I would actually argue it's quite horrible. In 3-player, getting interesting now. 4-player, this has got some big power to it because now it's each opponent discards a card. You draw 3 cards if they have the cards in their hand. But if you do something crazy like 5-player, 6-player, this thing can net you an entirely new hand. So just something to consider. It's an interesting card to say the least, but definitely something that favors discard because it gets more stuff back in your hand and also hurts your opponent's hands. Alright, card 2 that we are looking at is Tainted Aether. I love this card. This is an older card, but my goodness, in Commander does it change the rules. It's 2 colorless, black, once again 4 mana. It's an enchantment. Whenever a creature comes into play, its controller sacrifices a creature or land. If you're playing a creatureless deck, or very, very few creatures, Tainted Aether is going to be really one-sided. Making your opponents choose between their creatures and or lands to, keep their stuff going, it's kind of tough. It puts them in a very, very tough situation. So Tainted Aether really gets my vote for certain types of decks. Once again, though, just trying to make you aware of these cards. Alright, card number 3 we have is Call of the Wild. 2 colorless, green, for an enchantment. You can pay 2 green, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it into play. Otherwise, put it into your graveyard. To just top deck a creature card into play is pretty powerful. Let's say for some reason you're running a 5-color deck. You have Call of the Wild, you have a Progenitus in your deck, and you have a Worldly Tutor, I believe it is. The green tutor that searches for a creature and puts it on top. Well, for 5 mana total and 2 spells, you just got Progenitus into play at the end of an opponent's turn. Pretty powerful. And also just every turn, if you're playing green, you have massive amounts of mana. Why don't you just keep top decking your card and flipping out stuff into play, especially if you're creature heavy? This will start dumping guys into play and really outpace your opponent. Alright, next card we're looking at is Lux Cannon. 4 colorless for an artifact. Tap, put a charge counter on Lux Cannon. You tap, remove 3 charge counters from Lux Cannon, and you can destroy target permanent. This is a pretty good card by itself. Just because every 3 turns it gives you the opportunity to destroy a permanent. For 4 mana, you're going to be ramping up to it slowly. Toss in Proliferate or, anything that gives you extra types of counters for cards. All of a sudden, Lux Cannon could become an every other turn destroying stuff, or every turn if you really get enough Proliferates going onto the field. It's a good way to add an extra effect onto Proliferate spells, and it's also just powerful because it takes out a permanent. A lot of versatility in that card. Alright. Our 4th card is Flame Shadow Conjuring. Relatively new card, actually. 3 colorless and red for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay red. If you do, put a token on the battlefield that's a copy of that creature. It gains haste, and then you have to exile it at the beginning of the next end step. To get a token copy of each of your creatures, good way to get a bunch of extra stuff into play, but the real benefit that I see with this is I can play my creature, pay an extra red, send the token that I create on a suicide mission at my opponent, and still keep the original card on my side. And it also gives it haste. So to get a suicide version of a creature to just jump in and kamikaze your opponent with no care if the token dies or lives or anything like that, that's pretty good. Even if you can figure out a populate mechanic in red, which Not gonna lie, kind of difficult to do. But if you can populate, all of a sudden Flame Shadow Conjuring makes the 2 tokens and one of them stays with you. So a lot of synergy, a lot of fun stuff, and a lot of creatures with like enter the battlefield or leaves the battlefield mechanics. Flame Shadow Conjuring is going to make it a really, really scary threat to work with. Alright, so those are the 5 that I thought of that you should probably know of. I also wanted to reveal one of my favorite cards. Still converted mana cost 4. This card is so good in Commander because it has Flash. It's a 3/1, and it's got a very, very interesting ability that really exposes the faults or, I guess, lack of preparation your opponents may have. If you still don't know the card I'm talking about, I am talking about Notion Thief. This is one of my favorite cards of all time. As a speculation, I bought a ton of these when they were like 40 cents, 50 cents each, so I have a ton of these sitting in a box. But Notion Thief, 2 colorless, blue and black. It's a human rogue. It's a 3/1 with Flash. So already you kind of have like a blocker that's in your hand that might help you, but that's not the real kicker on this card. The real power with Notion Thief is that it has Flash, and then if an opponent would draw a card except for the first one he or she draws in each of his or her draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. Just take that in for a minute. You steal everything but their first card that they draw from their draw step. So you could even do like a group hug strategy where, each player draws 3 cards. Well, if you have Notion Thief in play, you draw 3 cards for each player. If your opponent plays something like, I don't know, a Wheel of Fortune, each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. If you flash Notion Thief into play, Notion Thief gives you all of those cards. Even more, your opponent decides to brainstorm. That's draw 3 cards and then take 2 cards from their hand and put them on top of their library. What it translates to if you flash out Notion Thief is you draw 3 cards, then your opponent takes 2 cards from their hand and puts them on their library. Notion Thief is just bonkers. I love this card. I love this card so much because it has such a cool theft system to it. The flavor is there. It's blue-black, which is going to be run in a lot of Commander cards. But Notion Thief is really that card you keep in your hand when the odds are not going in your favor. You've exhausted most of your hand. Your opponents have 5 or 6 cards in hand, a huge army of stuff, and, a player plays something like each player draws 3 cards or whatever they want to play. Notion Thief to the rescue nets you a full hand of stuff and denies all of your opponents everything else. It's pretty powerful. Alright, so anyway, those are my 5 plus bonus card of converted mana cost 4. As I always say, I am always looking for suggestions, even if they're weird, like, I don't know, a certain color that starts with the letter W. That might be too specific, but, just do something fun. Try to make some weird, like, out there recommendations, and I'll definitely incorporate them, and we'll see how I can talk about them in the Commander game format. Alright, this has been Brian Fadouk. Thanks for watching.